Greetings and salutations to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, Kluger with you once again. Today we are hanging out and talking about the gear selection in Grim Dawn. This suggestion for a video came from one of the subscribers here on the channel. His name is Dan Fitzy, if I recall correctly. And he just asked in a video with regards to, well, specifically gear selection towards the end game, or at least the current end game that we have available. Definitely an interesting question, and I would urge anyone else watching this video, if you have questions or suggestions, do leave them below in the comments section, and I'll be happy to try and oblige. So yeah, here we are. Let's have a bit of a chat about, I suppose, the general idea behind gear selection in the game. Now, a disclaimer right at the front worth mentioning is that gear selection is very particular. It's very, I guess, personal, depending on your potential character build. So it's really hard to give recommendations about your particular build. So I suppose this video is more in the vein of when you are choosing your gear for any particular character, here's a general guideline or general idea of how I feel would be a good way to approach it. Not to say I'm the expert and and the sort of the one-time answer to all your questions. I'm just one of many people playing Grim Dawn, and a lot of people play Grim Dawn a lot better than I do. But here I am trying to just give my humble suggestions. So without further ado, please enjoy this footage you see around you. Just me randomly running around in the game, and we'll just talk about a few points that I have. So the first one, the main one really, which dictates really your whole character at large, of course, but it does come into gear selection, is just being prepared and having a plan and knowing what your character is going to be at a very early stage. Most typically I would recommend, and I do this, I do plan out my builds with Grimcalc, which I'll have a link to below in the description box, which is a very powerful tool whereby you can literally plan out your whole build in a web browser, choosing all your skills, and you know how far up your mastery bar you're going to go, etc. But most importantly, you choose your skills, and in choosing your skills you have a really good idea of what your damage types are going to be. You might say go into Primal Strike with Shaman, and so you know you're going to be doing lightning damage. Or you might be looking at choosing Fire Strike from the Demolitionist tree, and so you know you'll be doing a good amount of either fire or physical damage. What else is there? There is the Chaos one from the Occultist tree. Jesus, the name escapes me. Soleil's Witchfire, and we know that does a lot of Chaos damage, and so you want to be choosing Chaos damage weapons or armor or buffs or whatever have you. So it seems like a really obvious thing, but really that dictates a lot of your gear selection, is that you want to know what your build is right from the get-go, and then as you progress towards late game, it's your chance to min-max, and so you knew from day dot what you are focusing on in terms of your character, and so when you get to the end game, you're keeping an eye out for the gear that's going to perfectly augment your focus and what you planned from at level 1. So just keep an eye out for that type of gear. I know it sounds really obvious, but that's really all you need to do. It's not particularly rocket science. You just you focus in on your plan, and hey presto, that's really all there is to it. So in terms of obtaining that gear, obviously there's a few different ways you can go about it, but just a few things to keep in mind. Number one is hit the shops. You will often find, this goes particularly for sort of mid-game as well, you will not often find, but sometimes you will just find a nice little piece of gear that lasts you for a good few levels. It just fits, and you'll just pop up randomly in one of the vendors. So it's always worth stopping by. Just when you're in town, you're offloading your extra gear you found, you're selling it off, and you might just have a quick peruse through all the weapons and armor you can see, and just check, because you never know what you might find. There's some pretty rare stuff that can crop up from time to time, so that's definitely worth doing. Another point I have here is to know your quartermasters. Similar, I guess, in nature in the go shopping point, but each quartermaster at each place carry quite unique gear. I suppose I find each quartermaster to be, quite thematic. Each carries a specific set of gear that tends to augment only a couple of damage types. So it's really worth knowing from the get-go, or at least as you travel through the game, checking out all the quartermasters and what gear they have to offer. Because you might find, at least in my experience so far, I've found that oftentimes a quartermaster or maybe two quartermasters have a good combination of gear that's going to last me up towards endgame, or perhaps be perfect for endgame. So that is definitely worth keeping an eye out for. If you really want to be getting into min-maxing your character and really optimizing the ideal gear for the build, you will need to grind, is what it comes down to. Once you reach max level, if you really want to know all about how far you can take your damage or how tanky you can make your character, you will need to probably grind for quite a while to find some decent gear. Not to say you necessarily need to grind it to reach max level. You can probably make it through with very little repetition of areas as you go through. Like I said with one of my earlier points, say Quartermaster gear is fairly easy to obtain once you grind up the reputation, so that can usually get you through to level, currently level 50 without any real fuss. But yeah, just to get to optimum levels, grinding at some capacity will be required, and possibly as we get the new difficulty levels out, more grinding may become necessary just to make sure your character gets through. But with this kind of game, it's par for the course, as it were. Now, in terms of a few particulars, again, like I was saying at the start of the video, I can't say exactly what your build needs, but these are a few general ideas that I always keep in mind when I am gearing out. Number one is armor value. These are in no particular order, but the first one I have written down is armor value, which, as of I believe build 27, does carry a lot more weight in terms of your build's survivability. I don't know exactly what it changed, but it's a lot more crucial than it used to be. So keeping an eye out for the best possible armor value you can obtain with your character is pretty damn key at this point in time. Even as you're grinding up through sort of the mid-game, if you find a piece of armor that's sort of worse in terms of its statistics, if its armor value is say 20, 30, 50% higher than your current piece of gear on that armor slot, it's probably worth a switch just to keep your character sort of up to scratch in terms of armor value. So that's definitely worth keeping an eye out for. And obviously within the confines of your character, if you're doing say a spirit heavy build, you're not only going to have so much cunning, so there's only certain gear you can wear. So yeah, just to the best of your ability within the confines and plan of your build. Offensive and defensive ability is also a really good thing to be keeping an eye out for on your gear, generally speaking. Again, depending on your specific build, but I find oftentimes that I'm lacking in one or the other depending on my skill selections and mastery choices. So that's a really good and easy way to really be buffing up those particular values. They're pretty damn key when it comes to either being able to hit or crit your opponents and or just general survivability. So if you're feeling either squishy or feeling like you can't hit anything, definitely be keeping an eye out for that. Generally speaking, you'll find that your higher end gear is going to have one of those two values on any piece of gear, but it's quite key to keep an eye out for, so do that. And finally, resistances, again, is just generally something you want to be on the lookout for. Resistances can sometimes go as a bit of an unsung hero, but you want to be making sure you've got something in everything. You know, obviously the elemental resistances come up a lot more often, generally speaking, and it's easier to have those at a decent level. That's sort of bare minimum, and as well piercing and poison damage can be quite handy as well. But just the more resistances you can have, the better. It's just a general rule of thumb, sort of regardless of your build type. You want to have those at a decent enough level just to stay alive, really, is what it boils down to. So, those are my, again, very general sort of tips and suggestions for gear selection in Grim Dawn. If you have a specific build and you want to have a bit of a chat about the specific gear you might want to look for, maybe leave a comment or a question below and I'll be glad to try and assist you. If you have any other suggestions, like I said at the start of the video, for other stuff you might want to see on the channel, also leave that down below and I'll do my best to help you out. So that's about all I have for you today. I hope to see you again next time. Please do remember to like and or comment below if this is something you enjoyed. I hope to see you again soon. My name is Kluger. You have a good one.